A big show for you. We got reports on the top rookie pass catchers that were taken in this April's draft. Which one is under the most pressure on day one? We have that answer. Plus, who better to give us some insight into what Jordan Love learned last year than some of Aaron Rodgers' backup quarterbacks? We're going to discuss all of that with Mina Kimes, Jeff Darlington, Kimberly Martin. It's NFL Live. It's Friday. We're heading into the summertime. Great to see everybody. But we are going to start today's show in Pittsburgh, where the Steelers made some news yesterday by releasing veteran guard David DeCastro. Cut saves the Steelers $8.7 million in cap space, and they moved quickly to replace DeCastro by signing free agent guard Trai Turner. But this all comes after longtime center Marquise Pouncey retired, and the Steelers lost offensive lineman Matt Filer and Alejandro Villanueva in free agency back in March. So big changes for a unit in charge of protecting 39-year-old Ben Roethlisberger. Jeff, how did this all come about?
Well, Dan, as if we didn't already have all these questions about the offensive line, then DeCastro comes along and is dealing with what he now says will be another ankle surgery. He is not sure whether he'll continue his career. He says that he would be happy to hang it up if indeed his ankle can't recover in time for the season. But this is certainly a situation facing this Steelers team that makes things even murkier. Now, we should point out they did sign Trai Turner, a guard who has some Pro Bowls to his resume. He did miss 9 games last year, but now this Steelers team will be with 4 new starters on the offensive line. One other important note, though, here is that they struggled last year, so perhaps they can just get better with a new group, Dan. But it's going to be tough times for the Steelers.
Right, I mean, that's a good point, Mina. I mean, this was a rough offensive line last year. Look, the team kind of sold out to bring Ben Roethlisberger back for probably 1 more year, or who knows, maybe 2. But how big a concern is this offensive line and the way it stands in front of Roethlisberger as of now?
It's a massive concern. Now, to be fair, as Jeff said, it was a massive concern last year as well, and a big part of the reason why the Steelers offense struggled so much down the stretch, why the run game struggled, why Ben Roethlisberger was throwing the ball so quickly. But, you know, just because there's change doesn't mean that it's going to be changed for the better. There are just question marks across that line. I know they like Dotson. There's hope that Zach Banner, who's a young tackle, can come up as well. And as you guys said, Trai Turner, you know, he had some good seasons in the past. Last year, of course, was battling injuries. But this is a far cry from, you know, the Steelers line of a few years ago under Mike Munchak, right, when they were one of the better lines in the NFL. And I think it's a good example of how quickly a really great line, a top 5 line, can suddenly find itself at the bottom of the league. And it's hard for me to see a world in which the Steelers offense looks better than they did last season if Roethlisberger doesn't have better protection.
Yeah, so one-dimensional. Last year they were first in the league in pass attempts per game, 28th in the league in rush attempts per game. And with the release of DeCastro, you know, they only have 1 starter of their 2020 offensive line return. They also have other business to take care of here. Free agents to be. Quarterback Roethlisberger, wide receiver Juju Smith-Schuster, Chukwuma Okorafor, who's going to move to left tackle. TJ Watt's going to need an extension. Minkah Fitzpatrick at some point is going to need an extension. The Steelers have a lot to do financially, and they don't have an offensive line to build behind. We'll see how that goes. Team that knocked the Steelers out of the playoffs last year, the division rival Cleveland Browns, made a point of trying to upgrade their defense this offseason. Part of that effort was the signing of veteran pass rusher Jadeveon Clowney to replace Olivier Vernon on the defensive line. Clowney, changing teams for the 3rd year in a row, spoke during the Browns' recent minicamp.
I've been training extremely hard this offseason, so I kind of already had a feel of where I was at coming here. I wouldn't have came if I wasn't healthy. I would have told them the same thing. I felt great coming in. I feel great now.
Over the last 2 seasons, Clowney ranks top 10 in the NFL in pass rush win rate and pressures per game, but just has 3 sacks to show for it. You know, he's never had 10 sacks in a season. And sure, he's missed 11 games due to injury over that last 2 years, but Cleveland is definitely going to need him to convert some of those pressures into sacks, or at least turn them into sacks created for his teammates there, Mina. So what does Clowney bring to this Browns defense?
I think he brings a lot. Sorry, I'm laughing at 211th. I didn't even know there was 210 guys to rank above him. But the thing is, Dan, I feel like Jadeveon Clowney, like we've almost reached a point where he's underrated. For a while, there was a lot of criticism of him around the league that he was overrated coming out of college because he wasn't able to turn that pass rush production into bringing down the quarterback, which is why he, of course, ranks 211th. But for all of that, he is still incredibly disruptive, especially on the inside, which is where I suspect you'll see him lined up a lot next to Myles Garrett. And he is an elite run defender, and that matters a great deal for this Browns team because while the defense made a ton of additions, particularly on the back end, which I believe Kimberly's going to talk about, they also had some really significant losses on the defensive line at tackle. Larry Ogunjobi is gone. Sheldon Richardson is gone. They're counting on young players and draft picks like Tommy Togiai to step up. And what would help those players a lot is if Jadeveon Clowney is able to bring that elite run-stopping prowess, that tackling, those tackles for losses that he did in previous stops to this defense. And I think he has that in him because he is still a very, very good player. He's just not one of the best pass rushers in the NFL.
Yeah, Dan, as Mina just talked about, adding Jadeveon Clowney, great move. But I'm looking at this secondary because that to me was the question mark all last year. I covered a lot of Browns games. So what do the Browns do in the offseason? They upgrade the back end. Rams had great defense last year, so they bring in John Johnson, Troy Hill. They drafted Greg Newsome, a guy that they love, and you got Grant Delpit back from injury. So they've got a lot of players in this back end that are going to be much improved.
Yeah, I think the fascinating thing about this secondary, Kimberly, is now they've just got bodies. I'm not really sure who's going to start, who's going to play where. Like Greg Newsome, you alluded to, their first draft pick this year. I don't know if he's going to get
Williams,
the starting position, or right, Greedy over Greedy, or how he is coming back from injury. Ronnie Harrison was decent at safety. Of course, bringing in John Johnson, who was elite in Los Angeles. But that's the beauty of these moves, is that defensive coordinator Joe Woods now has a lot of players to allocate towards the back end, whereas last year it kind of felt like they were just trying to survive schematically. I think the players that they did pick up, Newsome, Owusu-Koramoah, Johnson Hill, they all fit really well together. And I think as they try to compensate for some of those holes up front that I was talking about, particularly on the defensive line, having a better secondary, and you're correct, that absolutely was the weakness of the team last year, is going to be so helpful for Joe Woods.
And as a result, we now live in a world where preseason expectations are higher for the Browns than they are for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Who would have imagined? Earlier this week, Raiders defensive end Carl Nassib came out as the first openly gay active NFL player, saying he, quote, finally feels comfortable enough to get it off his chest. Earlier today, his teammate Darren Waller was asked his thoughts on Nassib's announcement.
Guys are going to go in with the intention of, accepting him and loving him for who he is, because he's our teammate. It's not anything that's going to change just because he came out. Like, he's going to be the same person that he has been. He's just letting himself be known to the world. So, guys may have these, phobias or things like that, and that's human nature. Like, guys are going to have to work through that. We can talk through that. We can help guys overcome that and realize that, hey, he's a human being and he deserves to do whatever he does and